Well, for many of you, I'm sure you're well aware of Watership Down. And I'm sure many of you are also aware of the 2018 remake which recently came out, made by the BBC. If you watched my trailer reaction, you'd know that I was a little skeptical of it, given the look, design and tone it seemed to be going for. Well, suffice to say, I watched all 4 parts of the remake, and also rewatched the original 1978 film shortly afterwards. Everything about this film is disturbing. And well, judging by this video's length, you can be sure that I had a fair bit to say about it. So let's begin. So for those of you that may not be familiar with Watership Down, let's just quickly run over the story. The story follows a group of rabbits living in their warren. One of the rabbits, named Fiver, has a vision that something bad is about to happen, which is going to destroy the warren and everyone living in it. So he, his brother Hazel and a few others escape the warren to seek out a new place to live. Along the journey they encounter many dangers. They finally reach a place of safety where they can live out the rest of their days in peace. So all is good and happy. But wait, it's not. As the rabbits realise they don't have any females, and worry that after they're gone, they won't have any offspring to carry on the future generations. So they raid a local farm, which has some female hutch rabbits, they manage to break them free, and so now all is good and happy. But wait, it's not. As a rabbit from their old warren named Captain Holly catches up with them, and informs them of a nearby warren which is run by a merciless dictator called General Woundwort. The rabbits decide to infiltrate this warren in order to rescue as many rabbits as possible. The operation appears to be a success, as they organise a breakout and manage to escape from Woundwort. And so now is all good and happy. But wait, it's not. As Woundwort has tracked down their warren, and now declares all-out war. An epic showdown ensues, to which Woundwort is eventually defeated, and finally, all is good and happy. But wait, it's not, as Hazel dies. Right, so that's the basic plot of Watership Down. So how does the original 1978 film compare to the 2018 remake? Well, for the most part, the 2018 remake pretty much follows the same story, though there were a few small changes made. First up though, it's worth noting that the original film's runtime was around 80 minutes, whereas the remake is split into 4 parts, each with a runtime of around 50 minutes. So the remake has a lot more time to play with when it comes to developing story. For the first half, where we follow the rabbits on their journey to their new home, the story seems pretty much the same. But for the second part, we get a lot more focus on Woundwort's warren, the Elfrafar, getting a closer look at how the hierarchy functions, and getting to know the characters who are suffering underneath it. Now to be fair, in the original we also get an idea of how Woundwort's warren operates, and it's enough for us to recognise just how much of a tyranny he has on the place and the suffering he causes. But it was quite cool to also get a deeper look into its inner workings. But as I said, the remake had a lot more time available to explore this setting than the original did, so I'm not going to hold it against the original too much. One thing I do think was straight up handled better in the remake though, is how Hazel has to convince the other rabbits to go along with him and Fiver towards the new warren. In the original, a bunch of rabbits hear about Fiver's dark vision and very quickly decide to go along with them, whereas in the remake it takes a lot more persuasion, and they explain about how Fiver's been right in the past about previous tragic events such as the flooding of last autumn, which kind of gives more justification as to why they were taken more seriously this time. Another moment that was added was Bigwig's first encounter with the Elfrafar rabbits as he leads a fox into them. In the original, we never actually get to see this scene. Bigwig basically fills in what happened in a voiceover, whilst we still see the rabbits running along.
One of them said, "You stay here." So I knocked him down. I had to, and raced off. Next thing I heard was this dreadful squeal.
So the Humber got the other rabbit?
You must have.
It felt like a scene that should have been included, but maybe they skipped out on it due to keeping the runtime down or budget reasons. So it was nice to see it actually included in the remake. Here, however, are the bits I think the story went worse for the remake. First up is how they introduced a far more romantic element between Hazel and Clover. Clover is one of the female hutch rabbits that Hazel rescues from the farm. Now yes, in the original there was a slight hint at romance between the two as she ushers this line towards him.
Clover,
Who's that?
it's me. We're back.
Hazel.
But that's about as far as their on-screen relationship went. Now you may argue that's a negative and makes her character pointless, which yes, is a fair point, but I would argue there was no real necessity for the story to focus on these two as a romantic couple, as it will pull time and development away from other elements, and that's exactly what the 28 remake does. For example, when Hazel is shot by the farmer in the 1978 film, it is Fiver who still believes Hazel is alive despite what the others are saying. And through the guidance of the Black Rabbit, it is him that manages to find his wounded brother taking shelter in a pipe. In the remake though, it is Clover that ends up finding Hazel instead of Fiver. This annoyed me because I felt the greater narrative here was supposed to be between the brotherly relationship Fiver and Hazel have. How Hazel will stand by and look after his brother, despite what the other rabbits may think of him, and in this scene where Fiver is the only one to believe Hazel is alive, despite what the other rabbits are thinking, is a good twist, and just goes to show how deep their bond as brothers is. Whereas with Clover and Hazel, I just don't think that level of bond has been earned, and so this moment comes across as incredibly forced and kinda cheesy.
I don't want to be apart from you again.
You won't be.
Corny.
There was also a change in reasoning as to why the rabbits decided to get females in the first place. In the original, they flat out say that they need females in order to carry on the future generations.
But we don't have any does.
Toes? Toes?
Not one. That means no kittens. After we're gone, no warrant.
Yet in the remake, they come up with this bullshit excuse about how they need females in order to dig out the warren.
But bucks can't dig. We need does.
What? Why would female rabbits be better diggers than the male rabbits? Why did the BBC feel the need to tap on this excuse for needing females? I think the fact that you need females to ensure you can carry on the future generations would be sufficient enough. Also, there was another element of the story which I felt was unnecessary, and that was a part at the beginning of part 4, where we get a brief flashback to Woundwort as a young rabbit, where his family is killed by a fox, which also results in him receiving his injury to the left eye. Okay, yeah, that could be interesting I guess, but they never really expand upon it. There's a brief moment under the bridge where it looks like Woundwort is beginning to question his actions, but it lasts for about a few seconds, and then everything's back to normal again. I'll expand a bit more on this in the character section, but for now, in conclusion to the story, points to the remake for filling in some of the gaps and further exploring elements we didn't get to see in the original, but points taken for swapping out certain character roles which I feel robs from the original story, and because of that, I think I'm going to give the point to the original. Okay, so let's compare the remake's take on the characters compared to how they were portrayed in the original. Again, it's worth noting that the remake had a much longer runtime than the original, so obviously was able to dedicate more time to character development. And what they did attempt to do was give more screen time to these secondary characters. And yeah, to be fair, in the original, much of the secondary characters such as Blackberry, Captain Holly, and Dandelion didn't really have much character in the original film, other than just being there. But at the same time, I would argue that they didn't really need development, as much of the focus needed to be on Hazel, Fiver, and Bigwig. You could make the argument as to why have them there in the first place, but I think having seemingly pointless characters in a film like Watership Down is a requirement, purely on the basis that the likelihood of a character dying in this film is pretty high, as the film establishes with the quick death of Violet at the beginning of the film. So it keeps you as the viewer on edge, knowing that any one of these seeming pieces of cannon fodder could suffer the next horrific fate. And to be honest, I don't think the remake even fleshed out these characters that much. I'd say apart from Captain Holly, most of these still feel bland and useless, with nothing really to offer the overall narrative. And as I mentioned earlier in the story, sometimes I even felt the addition of these characters took away from the original narrative, such as Clover taking up the role of Fiver in some of the cases. So then what about the already established characters? Well, Fiver I think pretty much remains the same, but Hazel and Bigwig took quite the knock. Hazel starts off by being incredibly insecure and naive, which over the course of the film he gradually finds his confidence to become a competent leader, with the heart of gold of course. But that means for the first half of the film, Hazel is incredibly useless, and his decisions that he made in the original film get taken up by other rabbits in the remake. Not to mention his pointless romance arc, as he fails to impress one of the females in his old warren, but of course gradually falls in love with Clover in the remake. I don't get why the filmmakers always need to have a character develop an arc like this, like it's a mandatory checklist or something. See, in the original film, Hazel always started out as competent, with leadership qualities, and throughout the film, we get to see him put those qualities to the test. Because the idea of Watership Down is to emphasise the struggles these rabbits go through with the whole world being against them. And you see them use their wit and tricks in order to survive. Having them dumbed down in the first half kinda takes away this element, putting more focus on their personal issues rather than the world they live in, making the scale of their peril seem smaller. The same goes for Bigwig. Bigwig I felt really got hard done with on this character development. He is far more confrontational and aggressive in the remake, especially towards Hazel. Scenes in the original where he's actually kinda supportive.
We want to go back and find out.
Go back? After all we've been through?
And probably get killed for wounding Captain Holly, an Owsler officer. Talk sense, for Frith's sake.
I don't believe you know where you're going.
Now listen to me, you bunch of mole-snouted muckraking.
He's now a complete prick about it.
We keep moving.
Are you giving me an order, Hazel? Because I didn't realize anyone had made you Chief Rabbit. Well, as there's no doors here, I'm gonna attempt to dig myself a scrape. Is that okay? Not because I want to rest, but because this is where I'm staying.
And he's massively dumbed down as well. For example, when he's trying to infiltrate his way into Woundwart's warren, in the original he's far more witty, and straight up admits to being a fighter, hence why he gets taken in.
I can run and fight.
Fight, can you?
I've been an officer in an Owsler.
So, you came to join us.
I thought you might have some use for me.
With the remake, he seems to struggle with his lying, and also tells them that he was never a fighter, but rather a storyteller.
Can you fight? Me? No, I'm not a fighter. No, I don't have the instincts for it. In my old warren, I was a storyteller.
In which case, why would Woundwort take him in to begin with? At least with him being clever and having the ability to fight, Woundwort could see the potential use for him. But being a dumb storyteller? Why would Woundwort logically hire him as a guard? Oh, and I forgot to mention Kihar, or Kahar as they now call him in the remake. Which makes sense I guess, as in the remake he's a completely different character to what he was in the original. And for the worse. In the original, Kihar was very eccentric, starting off with a bit of a temper.
We help you.
But he soon befriends the rabbits and is more willing to help them out. I especially love how in the original, they get Kihar to help them by letting him think that he comes up with the great idea to get females.
I find mates.
What a splendid idea, Kia. How clever of you to think of it. You very fine bird.
In the new one, however, he's far more malicious and comes across as a bit of a wanker.
I have a favour to ask. You see, our warren needs does. Oh, pardon you.
Tell you what, let me have a wee think about it. No.
After the rabbits look after him and feed him, he actually flies off to abandon them, only coming back because he once again falls and breaks his wing. Making his motives to eventually help the rabbits feel more selfish, even purposely showing up late to rescue them despite being well aware of the danger they could be in.
I will be back tomorrow. Maybe.
No.
I might come back. I might not.
Damn you! Flying wheat! What? You there!
At least in the original, Kihar is only late to the rescue because he can't see when the sun is going down, so gets confused. I also don't like how they changed his voice. In the original, he had this crazy zany accent, which to this day I'm still not quite sure what it was.
You stupid bunnies! You got no mates! Where are mates? Where are cheeks?
But it showed off his energy. In this one, he has a very bland and calm Scottish accent, which again just takes away from his character.
Hello again. What's your name, bud?
Kahar, what's it to you?
Kahar. How were you hurt, Kahar?
Hurt? I'm not hurt. Who's hurt? You hurt?
And finally, let's take a look at Wound War. Now, for the most part, his character is pretty much the same as it was in the original, and I think the voice acting on his character is actually pretty damn good.
And to those of you who tremble in the wake of birds, or foxes, or any of the 1,000 enemies of rabbits, I say this. In Ephrathah, we run from no Elul. We are the Elul.
But as I mentioned earlier, there's this one section in the remake where we get a flashback to him as a young rabbit, watching his family get mauled by a fox. So by doing this, you're obviously trying to humanize him, or rabbitize him, you know what I mean, by showing him to us in a weak and vulnerable state, which is meant to give the audience sympathy for the character. Here's the problem with that. Wound War is not meant to be a sympathetic character. He's a straight up, cold-hearted dictator who is hell-bent on maximum control, and will do anything to anyone in order to keep that control. I really don't see how you can expect an audience to have sympathy with a character of that nature. All you end up doing is taking away the mystery of his past. If you're going to go down this whole empathy route with the villain, then you will need to seriously downplay his villainy in order to make him more forgiving. But by downplaying his villainy, it will just ruin his character. So why they tried to explore this route, I have no idea. I thought that it was going to tie into the final showdown with the dog at the end, perhaps flashing back to mirror the situation of him as a young rabbit. But it didn't, so yeah, not sure what the goal was with that one. Again, I think I'm going to have to give the character development to the original. Alright, animation. Well, there's going to be no prize for who can predict who's winning this fight. Now, if you remember my review of the trailer, I was heavily concerned with the quality of animation that we could see. Now, there is some slight improvement from the trailer footage to the final product. As you can see, the fur is now a bit more detailed on the head, so at least the textures did improve somewhat. But oh my god, the actual movement of these rabbits is tragic. The way they run looks so automated and scripted. They animate at a constant pace like they were a mechanical ride at a fairground. Rabbits don't run smooth like that. They do almost little bursts as they hop along. Compare the running here to the running animation used in the original and you can see the difference. This lack of movement is only amplified more when the rabbits interact with one another or are fighting with other creatures. It just looks so shockingly bad. And it's not just the movement, it's also the facial expressions, or lack of, because there aren't any. Apart from a slight change in their brow, there's hardly anything to convey emotion through their expression. I mean, look at this shot of Bigwig. This is meant to be the scene where Bigwig is conflicted, as he has the weighted decision to make on whether to kill this innocent rabbit to maintain his cover, or spare her and risk them both dying. But look at his expression. There's no deep internal conflict going on. He just stares blank and derpy. On top of the poor animation, the remake is incredibly dull and boring to look at. when comparing to the original. There's no real stylistic change or use of colours to give the film life. The original, though mostly animated with a realistic look, still had moments where this realism was broken to give a more colourful and stylistic approach. Let's do some comparison shots to highlight this. First of all, the opening. Now I will give credit to the remake for including a different style of animation for the opening, but it just looks so bland. Compare this to the original, which has this abstract design and use of bright colours to emphasise the mood. The remake has this plain black silhouette, which yes is meant to be like how the old time stories were told with paper cutouts on sticks, but that's impressive because it's real. This is CGI. You could have done so much more with the creativity. Just look at the animation styles used in the new Spider-Man film. That's all CG, so there's no excuse. Let's also take a look at the iconic shot of Fiver envisioning the blood running down the hill. In the original, notice how the colour palette shifts to emphasise the red and element of danger, plus how the animation evolves into this stylistic, sharp use of black lines. It's a pretty intense scene to emphasise Fiver's dark and twisted visions, coupled along with the intense music of course. So how does the remake handle this scene? Well, we see the hill slowly turn a dark shade of red in the reflection of his eye. Then he blinks and it's over. Cool. Well, what about the iconic scene everyone remembers, where we see how the old one was filled in and led to the deaths of many of the old rabbits? Well, in the original we once again get a colour change as all the rabbits are reduced to this soulless grey colour with piercing red eyes, and their ghostly heads frantically floating through the warren, followed by an abstract shot as the ground is ripped apart to reveal this blood red soil beneath. It looks horrifying, it sounds horrifying, but it leaves a lasting impression to emphasise the destruction man causes on the landscape. So, how does the 2018 remake handle this iconic moment? Well, we get some badly animated rabbits running through a warren with some badly animated soil filling them in. The scene looks incredibly plain, with the only colour on the palette being brown. It doesn't offer any visual stimulation like the original, and the only sound we have to complement this is a typical choir-esque orchestra over the top. Which is actually alright for what it is, but remember the ghastly cries of the rabbits from the original that stuck in your head? There's no sound like this in the remake, no sound of the rabbits struggling, scratching, panicking, etc. And you may be thinking I'm some sort of crazed psychopath for wanting this, but that's what this scene was supposed to do. It was meant to horrify, it was meant to dramatise the horror of what was going on, because part of the film's message was against human development in the countryside.
They just destroyed the warren because we were in their way.
They'll never rest until they've spoiled the earth.
I just don't feel the remake giving me the same level of shock and horror that the original presented, and it doesn't stick in my mind. And that's the same basic stories for how I felt of most of the scenes in the remake. They're just lackluster mirrors of what the 1978 version originally put forward. And as much as I'd love to go through each one scene by scene, that would end up making this video over 3 hours long easy, and I don't think anyone is quite prepared to listen to me ramble on for quite that long. Though I will point out a couple of moments in the remake that I thought actually did look quite good. The first is Fiver's vision in the deceptive warren that they first find, how the tree roots suddenly flash into spines and how the contrast suddenly flies up. That looks really cool and genuinely creepy. The other moment I will have to give credit to is the epic slow-mo shot we get of Kihar flying in, as we see the water droplets flowing off his wings, coupled with the silhouetted lighting in the background. That looks bloody good. It's just too bad there aren't any more epic moments like this throughout the entire duration. And for my final comparison, I promise, we'll be looking at one of the last scenes towards the end of the film where Woundwort is storming the warren whilst Hazel is trying to lead the dogs towards it. Now, ignoring the lack of animation, as I think I've drilled into that enough, the pacing of this scene is also lacking. There's actually a pretty nice musical score going on in this scene, which again has a choir singing in the background, but also has this violin piece playing over, which begins to build and build, like it's really leading to something climatic. The only problem is that this scene drags on for a little bit too long, because every time the music feels like it's fully built up, the scene is still going, so the music once again drops and the build up has to start all over again. And when it finally does reach the climatic part, it just feels really lackluster. You compare this to the original where we're cutting between the intense fight of Bigwig and Woundwort, where there's blood flying everywhere. Bigwig and Woundwort are both to the point of exhaustion, with blood and spit dripping everywhere. And then suddenly we get a dramatic cut to the ravenous dog charging towards the Warren. Like, look at that shot. That's fucking intense, compared to this. The dog comes charging in, ripping these rabbits to shred. The Watership Down theme is starting to kick in over the top, and then you get this final shot of the blood-ridden dog and the blood-ridden Woundwort jumping into one another before the scene cuts. Say what you want about Watership Down, but you've got to admit that's a bloody epic scene, and it all happens in half the time that it takes the remake. Alright, so I think I've droned on long enough. So what's my conclusion? Well, despite all the negativity I've made towards the original, I don't know if I can say that I actively hate it. I mean, to be fair to it, this remake didn't do anything insulting to the original. It didn't turn it into a forced joke fest like the trailer led me to believe.
Good heavens. I mean, good gracious. I mean, we're in. Good heavens. I mean, good gracious. I mean, that is to say, Hazel, if your brother has taken firm stock in such a portent, then
I think what Blackberry's trying to say is, we're in.
Though there were some odd moments of humour put in.
What do you call a happy rabbit? A hoptimist.
Like, what? Why would you say that? You're hiding from Woundwort, who is literally a few feet away from you. Why would you pick this moment of all times to tell a shitty joke and break the tension of the scene? It didn't try to throw in some plot twist, nor did it try to drastically change any of the characters to have them with different motives. But at the same time, that's also kind of its weakness. It didn't take any risks. It didn't try to make itself different from the original. It didn't put a spin on the old narrative. So it just ended up falling short of the original. And if it didn't set out to be different, why did it have to exist? The only real difference it offers is in the fact that it's CGI animated. But if that was the only difference it was striving for, why does the CGI look like it was so cheap? If you're going to make it 3D, at least try to make it look good in 3D. Like I said in my trailer review, I don't really see the point of the CGI remake of The Lion King, as it looks like it's just treading on the same narrative. But at least they've gone out their way to make the CGI look damn good. With this new Watership Down, the 3D is just a step down from the original 2D style. Oh, and not to mention that the iconic song Bright Eyes by Garfunkel is nowhere to be heard. Not even a remix of it, which again was another disappointment. My final advice to you guys would be, go check out the remake if you're really curious, but otherwise, don't waste your time on it, and instead, go back to watch the original. It may be a cesspit of childhood trauma that will keep you up late at night, but that's why we love it. Oh, and as a quick update, due to all the copyright strikes my videos tend to receive, and my latest review of Felladay being demonetized, I've decided to go and set up a Patreon page, which I will link below. I've never really looked at Patreon before, so haven't properly set it up with goals or tiering systems. At the moment it's just your basic page, and you donate however much you like. And of course I'll give all supporters a shout out in future videos. And by all means, I don't want to put any pressure on people to donate, as I will still keep making videos, and the fact that you guys are watching and commenting on these videos is already awesome enough. The Patreon is more of a way to see if I can get some sort of financial security should YouTube ever go mad and cull this channel, to which I could treat this as a part-time job to put more time and effort into videos and to have them uploaded more frequently. I've also set up a Twitter which you can now follow me on, which I will also link below, and again, I've never really used Twitter either. Yes, I know, that's weird, so bear with me whilst I get used to that as well. Again, this is primarily there so if YouTube ever goes ballistic and deletes my channel out of nowhere, I'll still have a way to keep in touch with you guys. But yeah, Happy New Year to you all, thank you so much for the growing love and support in 2018, and here's to an even stronger 2019. But until the next one guys, take care.